I'm done with this show. Steve Martin didn't raise his voice. He didn't storm off. He said it the way you might say you're done watering a dying plant. Across the table, Michael Strahan blinked, twice, before trying to recover with a nervous chuckle. Come on now, Steve. You're just messing with me, right? Martin didn't blink. He reached for the mic clipped to his collar, peeled it off, set it neatly on the desk between them, and then he stood up. Producers in the wings froze. One anchor's jaw visibly dropped. There was no music cue, no applause, just the dull, naked sound of someone walking off a live set in absolute silence. And just like that, one of the last men in Hollywood who never needed to raise his voice to command a room ended the interview. Strahan glanced off camera, mouthing, "What the hell just happened?" But everyone already knew. They just didn't want to admit it. This wasn't a tantrum. It wasn't a stunt. It was the most quietly devastating takedown anyone had seen on morning television in years. And for the first time in a long time, America sided with the guest. It started 20 minutes earlier. A simple booking. A promotional spot for Steve Martin's latest film. GMA had done hundreds of these. The producers expected charm, wit, maybe a dry one-liner or two. What they got instead was a warning shot across the entire media industry. Because from the moment Martin sat down, something was different. He didn't smile on cue. He didn't nod at the teleprompter. He didn't play along. Instead, he waited, watched. The questions began innocent enough. How it feels working again. What fans can expect from the movie. What it's like acting at 78. Martin gave tight, focused answers. No jokes. No fluff. Just facts. That's when Strahan changed gears. "So Steve," he said, tilting his head with that familiar GMA charm. "You've had a long career. You've played the clown, the romantic, the philosopher. But tell me, who is Steve Martin really?" The question was dressed in curiosity, but the tone was something else. It was the kind of question designed to trap you into opening up, into performing authenticity, into saying something raw for the sake of ratings. Martin's face didn't move. He didn't blink. He didn't smirk. Instead, he said 7 words. "I'm not here to be dissected." Strahan laughed, tried to ease the moment. "Oh, come on, Steve. People want to know the man behind the act." Martin turned his head. "Then they'll have to keep wondering." The audience went silent. The crew did too. Because in that moment, it was clear. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't Steve Martin being difficult or eccentric. This was a boundary, drawn, enforced, and made visible to millions of people on live television. And Strahan didn't know what to do with it. He wasn't used to no. The control room didn't know whether to cut to commercial or ride it out. You could see it on the producers' faces through the glass, hands hovering, waiting for someone to make the call. But nobody did. Because this was Steve Martin. You don't cut away from Steve Martin when he decides to stop playing the game. Strahan leaned forward, trying to rescue the moment with charm. "Hey, I didn't mean anything by it, brother. We're just having a conversation." Martin looked at him. No smile, no anger, just cold precision. "You call it a conversation. I call it mining. You ask personal questions not because you care about the person, but because you need content." The words hung there. You could hear someone in the audience gasp, barely audible, but real. Strahan blinked. "That's a little harsh, don't you think?" "No," Martin said flatly. "It's honest. And if that feels harsh, maybe honesty's the problem here." You could see Strahan's practiced TV smile flicker, a hairline crack in the broadcast mask he wore every morning. He tried to laugh it off again, but this time, no one laughed with him. The audience wasn't breathing. The studio air had thickened. Martin continued, his voice level but sharp, every word deliberate. "You bring people on this show so you can package them. Clip a soundbite, post it online, chase a trend. You turn conversations into products. But I've been doing this for 50 years. I know when I'm being sold." Strahan looked to the producers again, eyes darting for help. One of them mouthed, "Wrap it." But Martin wasn't finished. He gestured toward the cameras. "You know what the tragedy is, Michael? This place used to mean something. Morning television used to be where people came to share ideas. Music, art, real talk. Now it's all algorithms and fake laughter." He turned back to Strahan. "I didn't come here to sell a movie. I came here because I was told there was still space for honesty. I see now that was a lie." The audience shifted, uncomfortable but glued to every word. Strahan, still searching for footing, tried to pivot. "All right, Steve, let's take a step back, maybe talk about Martin cut him off, his tone icy. No. You asked who Steve Martin really is. You just found out. He's the man who knows when the show's not worth staying for. And with that, he stood up. He didn't rush. He didn't storm. He simply took off his mic, placed it on the desk, and said, calmly, almost softly, I'm done with this show. Then he walked off, leaving Strahan staring after him, his face frozen somewhere between shock and embarrassment. The studio lights didn't dim. The cameras didn't cut. It was live. Millions watched as Strahan sat there, silent, searching for a line that never came. No music. No fade-out. Just raw, unfiltered truth hanging in the air. And in that silence, Steve Martin did something most celebrities never do. He reminded America that you don't need to yell to burn something down. Sometimes, all it takes is walking away. By the time Steve Martin's car door shut outside the GMA studio, the video was already online. Someone in the control booth had leaked the raw feed before the show even cut to commercial. No edits. No music. No spin. Just 6 unbroken minutes of a Hollywood legend dismantling the entire architecture of morning television, with nothing but his voice, his patience, and the truth. The clips spread like wildfire. Twitter, Reddit, Facebook, even LinkedIn. Within an hour, it had 3 million views. By noon, 40 million. The hashtags told the story. Hashtag Steve Martin walks off. Hashtag GMA exposed. Hashtag silence wins. People weren't just reacting to what he said. They were reacting to what he didn't say. No anger. No cursing. No scene. Just a man who refused to perform for a machine that had forgotten what authenticity looks like. Inside ABC headquarters, chaos. Producers were being chewed out by network executives who wanted to know how they'd let it happen. Strahan's team was in damage control mode, trying to spin it as a misunderstanding, a moment taken out of context. But the problem was, there was no context to fix. The truth was right there, live, raw, undeniable. Every frame told the same story. Steve Martin had looked directly into the camera and said what millions of viewers had quietly felt for years, that television had stopped being about truth and had become about performance. Meanwhile, Steve Martin stayed silent. He didn't post. He didn't clarify. He didn't apologize. He didn't even make a statement. He just disappeared. A single photo surfaced later that afternoon. Him walking through Central Park, hands in his pockets, wearing the same gray suit from the show. No entourage. No PR handlers. Just a man taking a quiet walk after detonating a bomb on live television. That silence, that refusal to engage, made everything louder. News anchors debated it. Podcasters dissected it. Headlines screamed his name. Steve Martin walks out on Strahan. A new Hollywood rebellion? The day GMA lost control. What Steve Martin just did to morning TV, and why it matters. On the next day's show, Michael Strahan looked exhausted. The usual bounce in his step was gone. His smile felt forced, brittle. Yesterday's interview with Steve Martin took an unexpected turn. He began. We at GMA respect all of our guests and regret any misunderstanding. It was corporate, sterile, and empty. Viewers saw right through it. Comment sections filled with people calling out the apology for what it was, a performance about a performance. One viewer wrote, Steve Martin didn't storm out. He simply stopped pretending. And that scared them. Another said, he didn't destroy the show. He exposed it. But the most powerful comment came from an unexpected place. A former network journalist who had quietly retired 2 years earlier. What Steve Martin did wasn't rebellion, she wrote. It was withdrawal. He refused to trade his dignity for another segment. Every journalist in this country felt that moment in their gut. Because deep down, we've all been there, watching truth get edited out, one smile at a time. That post alone was shared 500,000 times. By that evening, one thing was clear, Steve Martin hadn't just walked off a show. He had forced the entire media industry to look in the mirror. And the reflection wasn't pretty. For the first time in years, the public wasn't laughing with television, they were watching it squirm. And the man who made them laugh for half a century had just made them think. It happened 2 days later. Good Morning America tried to move on, tried to pretend nothing had happened. But the air inside that studio was different now. You could feel it, brittle, nervous, uncertain. The laughter sounded thinner. The segments felt forced. Every host was walking on eggshells, careful not to cross an invisible line. But the viewers hadn't moved on. Every morning, New clips of Steve Martin's quiet exit were still circulating, paired with captions like, "This is how you walk away with dignity," or "The moment honesty came back to television." Ratings for GMA dropped by 18% in 48 hours. Sponsors started asking questions. The network's PR department was drowning in emails. Then came the mistake. Michael Strahan, tired, cornered, humiliated, finally cracked. It was a Thursday morning segment. Lighthearted. Supposed to be about celebrity charity events. But one of the guest commentators, a former journalist, made an offhand joke. "Hopefully this one doesn't end with another guest walking out." The audience laughed nervously. But Strahan didn't. He froze for half a second, then leaned forward with a tight smile. "You know, people keep bringing that up," he said, his tone flat, but his eyes sharp. "But let's get one thing straight. That wasn't bravery. That was ego." Steve Martin didn't stand for truth. He ran from questions. The laughter died instantly. "This job," Strahan continued, "isn't about making people comfortable. It's about asking what the audience wants to know. If someone can't handle that, maybe they shouldn't sit in this chair." You could almost hear the producers panic through the cameras. The teleprompter feed went blank. One of the co-hosts tried to intervene. "Michael, maybe we should." But Strahan wasn't done. No, let's say it." Everyone's acting like that moment was some kind of revelation. It wasn't. It was a tantrum. A tired old man walking out because the questions weren't pre-approved. He caught himself, too late. The damage was done. The silence that followed was suffocating. The co-host smiled awkwardly and cut to commercial, her voice trembling. "We'll be right back after this." But they weren't right back. The clip leaked before the break ended. And just like before, it went viral, but this time, against Strahan. The captions were brutal. "Michael Strahan can't handle the truth. Insecure, defensive, finished. GMA host melts down on live TV." Steve Martin said nothing. He didn't post. Didn't respond. But the next morning, his publicist released a 2-sentence statement. "Mr. Martin stands by his words. Some shows end themselves. All he did was leave." That single line hit harder than any comeback. By noon, ABC executives held an emergency meeting. PR demanded an on-air apology. Strahan resisted. "I'm not apologizing for telling the truth," he said. He's the one who made it personal. But it wasn't personal anymore. It was public. Network affiliates were calling in, worried about brand image. Advertisers were threatening to pull contracts. And inside the GMA studio, staff whispered what everyone was thinking, but no one dared to say. "Michael's done." That weekend, major newspapers ran think pieces. The end of the celebrity interview. Steve Martin's walkout and the death of fake media. When silence becomes a revolution. The Los Angeles Times headline said it best. A comedian just said what every American's been thinking. And suddenly, it wasn't about GMA anymore. It wasn't even about Strahan. It was about trust. About truth. About what happens when the audience finally sees behind the curtain and realizes the laughter's been fake all along. By Monday morning, the machine had turned on itself. ABC's boardroom looked like a war zone. Lawyers, PR strategists, and network heads arguing over whether to fire Strahan outright or suspend him quietly and let the storm pass. But there was no storm to wait out anymore. This wasn't weather. This was climate. Every late-night host, every podcast, every independent journalist in America was talking about the same thing, the Steve Martin moment. Clips of the walkout were still trending, but now side by side with Strahan's meltdown. It was like watching two worlds collide, the quiet dignity of a man who walked away and the desperate performance of one who couldn't let go. Public sentiment wasn't divided. It was unanimous. People were done. Done with fake smiles. Done with scripted laughter. Done with shows that called manipulation conversation. Steve Martin had struck a nerve, and that nerve ran straight into the heart of mainstream media. By Tuesday, sponsors began to flee. An internal memo leaked. 6 major advertisers were reviewing partnerships. Another line read, in bold red, "Public trust damage, severe." The network panicked. They needed a way to reclaim control, or at least the illusion of it. And so, they made one last gamble. They reached out to Steve Martin. Not through his agent. Not through his publicist. Directly. A private letter, hand-delivered by courier to his home in Beverly Hills. The letter was short, contrite, carefully worded. "We would like the opportunity to clear the air. One final conversation. Live, unedited, your terms. No producers. No scripts. No softballs. They were desperate. And to everyone's shock, Steve Martin said yes. 3 days later, America watched as the familiar Good Morning America logo flickered on screen, but the tone was different. No music. No crowd. Just Strahan and Martin sitting across from each other in a quiet studio. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Strahan exhaled, leaning forward. His voice low, measured. Steve, I'll be honest. That day, I felt humiliated. I felt attacked. I thought you were trying to embarrass me. Martin nodded slowly. That's the difference between truth and attack, Michael. One hurts your image. The other helps your soul. The words landed like a gavel. Strahan looked down. Maybe I forgot the difference. Maybe we all did, Martin said. You, me, the audience. We stopped talking with each other. We started talking at each other. He paused, glancing toward the camera. Television used to be where people listened, not where they waited for their turn to talk. There was no applause. No cue card. Just silence. Real silence. The kind that makes people shift in their seats because it feels too real. Strahan nodded, eyes glassy. You know, I think people just want to feel seen again. Then stop performing, Martin said quietly. Start being. It was simple. Brutal. True. That was the moment everything changed. The clip aired live, and by evening it had more than 80 million views. The full exchange, raw, human, unrehearsed, became the most watched segment in morning television history. And when it ended, something happened that no one expected. Steve Martin smiled. Michael, he said softly, you're better than the script they give you. We all are. Then he stood, offered his hand, and this time, Strahan stood too. They shook hands. No music. No laughter. Just two men standing in truth. And America applauded. Not the kind of applause you give to entertainment. The kind you give to closure. That night, news anchors across networks played the clip, each trying to explain what had just happened. But one commentator said it best. Steve Martin didn't destroy Good Morning America. He reminded us what a real conversation sounds like. The world didn't move on from Steve Martin's walkout. It adapted to it. Within a week, the footage from Good Morning America was being studied in boardrooms, film schools, and newsrooms across the country. Every network executive suddenly wanted what Steve Martin had created, that rare, impossible thing, a moment that felt real. But you can't manufacture honesty. You can't stage truth. And that was the lesson most of them still didn't understand. ABC issued a formal statement, calling the conversation between Martin and Strahan a turning point in modern broadcasting. But viewers didn't need a press release to tell them what they had witnessed. They had seen a man draw a line and another man find redemption on live television. It was the kind of moment that couldn't be edited, couldn't be repackaged, couldn't be forgotten. Overnight, the comment sections that had once been wastelands of sarcasm and noise became something else. Thoughtful, reflective, almost human. One user wrote, "That wasn't an interview. That was therapy for America." Another said, "He didn't destroy Michael Strahan. He restored him." And for millions of older viewers who had grown up with Steve Martin, who remembered when television still had integrity, who remembered when silence meant something, that moment felt like closure. Something in the culture had broken years ago, and for 6 quiet minutes on a weekday morning, it felt like it had been repaired. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effect spread far beyond GMA. Other networks began airing long-form interviews again. No flashy edits, no audience laughter tracks. CBS tried a segment called Conversations Uncut. NBC quietly cut half of their scripted celebrity fluff. Ratings rose. Audiences stayed longer. Because people weren't watching for gossip anymore. They were watching for truth. Steve Martin, meanwhile, retreated from the spotlight again. No follow-up tour. No book deal. No podcast. Just silence. When a reporter from the New York Times asked him if he realized how big the moment had become, he only said, "If honesty becomes a trend, then we're still lying." I didn't start anything. I just stopped. It was the most Steve Martin answer imaginable. Quiet, understated, unshakably wise. Michael Strahan stayed on GMA, but he was changed. His interviews became slower, more thoughtful. He listened more than he spoke. And something strange happened. People started liking him again. Not the polished host. The man underneath. Months later, he told an audience at a media summit, "That day, I thought I was being humiliated. But really, I was being humbled." The room applauded, softly. By the end of the year, Time magazine ran a cover story titled, "The Walkout That Woke Up Television." It wasn't just about one man leaving a studio. It was about a culture realizing it had been performing for too long, and finally, mercifully, stopping. They called it the Martin Effect. A quiet revolution against everything fake, everything polished, everything empty. And the strangest part? It didn't come from a protest, or a speech, or a viral outrage. It came from a whisper, from one calm voice saying enough. In the years that followed, that moment would be replayed, studied, and quoted in documentaries, lectures, and film retrospectives. And every time, the same line echoed across generations. I'm done with this show. Simple, final, eternal. Not just a rejection of a program, but of an era. Because in that moment, Steve Martin didn't just shut down Good Morning America. He shut down the illusion that entertainment had replaced truth. And somewhere, in living rooms across America, people who'd stopped believing in television sat up a little straighter and whispered, "Finally,